I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.
Welcome to the Forgiveness Solution Podcast. I'm Reverend Misty Time. So happy you're joining us. You can find me at revmisty.com. Please send me your forgiveness questions or your forgiveness stories at revmisty@outlook.com. And please subscribe to the Sacred Stories Podcast. We would love it if you would. Today, I am thrilled, I am pleased as punch to be able to share with you an amazing guest. And we're going to talk about something I am passionate about, and that is, of course, forgiveness, but also finding help when you're ready to forgive. So today, Kathy Penfield, marriage and family counselor, is going to join us today. And we're going to really dig deep about what's out there, because sometimes just talking to your best friend isn't enough. And I think that counseling is really, really important. Not just group therapy, talking to a counselor. There's so many different kinds. What do you do? Who do you go to? Well, we're going to answer all those questions for you today. And Kathy is the person to go to. She's going to answer some questions that I am telling you, I didn't even know I knew to ask. And that's why Kathy's here today. Kathy, can you say hi?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here. You know, I have a really funny therapy story, and it's so true. So when I was younger, therapy was one of those things that I thought was for really weak people. And so I refused to go. And I had friends who went to therapy, and I wasn't going to do such a thing. And it was during the end of a marriage, my marriage, and I decided that, okay, I would go to counseling with my husband to get one thing done. It was to prove that he was wrong and I was right. And of course, we went to therapy and we were immediately fired. And I was like, well, that didn't work out so well, probably because I didn't go with the right reasons. And the therapist said clearly to both of us that we needed to go to therapy individually. And I was like, no, because that wasn't really what I wanted. Ultimately, the marriage fell apart, and so did I. And the front of a grocery store at a stoplight, I ended up having a full-on panic attack. Yep, this reverend had a full-on panic attack. And then I realized that maybe pulling myself up by the bootstraps wasn't, going to work so well. And I ended up calling one of my friends that, had spouted the good reasons for therapy and decided to give in and thought I would go to one of these therapists and see what they had to say for themselves. And so I did. I went to a therapist, and as I walked in, I looked at her and I said, all right, this is the deal. You get me for like 5 sessions. And if you can't fix me in that amount of time, I'm out. And I said, I do not want to talk about my childhood. Has nothing to do with what's going on. And she looked at me with her very sweet face and gave me a little smile and asked me to sit down. And 6 months later, a few more than 5 sessions, my life had changed. I was really able to understand why I had made the choices I had made, including the marriage, my part I had played in it, and where my childhood might have had many, many effects on my adulthood. And so now I'm that person, that friend, that reverend that moves people towards counseling. And for many different reasons, not just to talk about your childhood. So now I'm a fan, a big fan. I'm older and much wiser. And I think that therapy kind of gets a bad rap. And could you talk more about therapy? And I haven't really given your bio yet, because you have such a deep, rich bio. Here, let me dig into that. Let me just get there. I kind of jumped forward because I was so excited. I was just so excited. All right. Kathy is a marriage and family therapist here in San Diego, California. And she has been trained and works in a whole bunch of different modalities, and we're going to have her talk about that. But she has experience in PTSD, working with anxiety and depression, sexual addiction, drug addiction, spiritual issues. And I think that's just fascinating. Anger management and trauma and work stress. Now, I'm telling you, who doesn't have some work stress? She's also had experience with couples, working with infidelity and marital and relationship issues. And I think that's where unforgiveness comes a lot in. Anytime you get relationship issues. Don't you agree, Kathy?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So she's going to also talk about some different modalities I had never heard of before. And I think that's fascinating. Also, she has had some different experience that couldn't even imagine, working with sexual abuse, both the victims and the perpetrators, and of course PTSD. So let's dig in. You've heard my therapy story, and now let's hear more about why you chose to go work in this field, and let's talk more about everything you do.
Well, I was led into this field actually by God. I was a medical sales rep for many, many years. And I always knew that there was something else that I was supposed to do. And I got led to a ministry called Life Purpose, where I found out what my gifting was. And it ended up being that I'm meant to be a counselor. And as I look back on my life, whatever your gifting is, however God made you, you're doing it somewhere in your life. You may not know you're doing it, but you're doing it. And friends would always come to me for advice. I'd always be there to help and be a peacemaker in the family, to always work towards bringing people together. And so as I looked at my life, I thought, wow, I've already been doing this. But then I decided to do it more professionally. So it took me many years. I got my degree at 40, went back to school at 38, and took about 6 years to get my licensing because I work full-time in medical sales. I work for a big company selling eye products. And then after 8 years, and I finally took a long time to pass my testing. And during the process of that, found out I had ADHD, which made a lot of sense of why I'd had difficulty in school. So a lot of that stuff was resolved, and got my license finally, and just kind of did it periodically, volunteering, different things, getting trained in different modalities while I was still working for the company. And then and I just did it on my own free time outside of my work schedule. And then just recently I've been led to finally leave the company and retire and do this full time, which is my passion and my love. And I've never been happier. Because once you do what you're called to be doing, it's a totally different deal.
Isn't that the truth? It's just, it's so fulfilling when you get to do what you do. And I'm so blessed that you get to sit in front of me and I get to do what I love to do. And look at you, just, so exciting. I'm so happy for you. And I'm glad that you get to share your passion and your knowledge with us today. And talk to us about therapy and what is therapy and the different types. Now you're a marriage and family counselor, and you have so many things behind you and different types of modalities that you do. So talk to us about that. When someone comes to you and say, I think I need therapy, what is that? Like I told you my story, I walked up to a therapist. I'd never been to therapy, really, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I want you to talk to me, but let's go ahead and try this. What do you do with a person like that?
Well, I think what happens with most people is they don't really seek out therapy until there's a crisis happening.
Right.
And either a past trauma that they had has been activated and it's starting to affect all of their life, such as a PTSD type of experience, which everyone has some PTSD. There's little trauma and big trauma. And a lot of times in life, if things haven't been resolved, if you haven't grieved things, if you haven't processed things, they get activated by relationships, by jobs, by all kinds of things. So most of the people that come to me, they're really at a crisis point, and many have not gone to therapy before. And I think the most important part of therapy is, first of all, to pick somebody you feel comfortable with. I feel it's a very sacred ground between the therapist and the client. And when they come, my goal is to make them feel safe and feel like this is a place that they can come and finally talk about whatever they need to talk about. Whatever secrets are in their closet, this is a place that they can come to. And I find that even after the first session, once people kind of get over that, and I do like a 30-minute consult with them on the phone first to help them feel comfortable, and then they come to the office. And once they get in the office, they, start talking, and they just get a cathartic relief, even in just having someone finally that's willing to hear their story.
So do most therapists, do you usually get to interview them on the phone before you meet with them?
Okay. Yes, you do that. And I would suggest actually with most clients that they interview several therapists before they pick, or make sure that the one they pick they're clicking with.
Right.
Because that is a huge thing. If you need to be able to connect that relationship with that person, sometimes is the first time somebody's really ever experienced an intimate relationship. So it's a very sacred ground, and it's a place where it needs to be safe, non-judgmental, and a place that's protected confidentially, and just a place that people can come and share what's going on.
And I think that's a really important point that you made, that it's confidentiality. Now, we all have really good best friends. I know I'm very blessed. I have amazing friends, but confidentiality is a really big piece. I mean, talking to your friend and another friend and another friend is a little bit different than talking to a therapist, because it is confidential, and the therapist is not emotionally connected to your stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So they're a little bit like that third-party referee. They're able to see it a little bit clearer, and they're able to give you a little bit more information than maybe your friend who loves you dearly but is a little bit more connected to your drama, correct?
Absolutely.
Right. And plus it's confidential. So they're not going to go and tell the other friend, and they're not going to tell the other friend at coffee the next day, well, I talked to so-and-so and so-and-so, and we're mad at, it's not going to happen. This is real work that's going to happen between you and your therapist.
There's confidentiality. The only limits to confidentiality with any profession, and especially with counseling, is if somebody was going to hurt themselves or someone else.
Very good point.
And if that is done, or if during the session you talk about somebody that has molested a child and is still of age, or they have actually experienced a molest and it's never been reported, and they're younger than 18. So in those cases, then we need to report to Child Protective Services in one, and also to the authorities for the other. But even if that were to happen, I always discuss it with the client first so that there's no big surprises.
Oh, very good point. Thank you for telling that the audience that
I think
too.
That's very important for the trust factor with the therapist.
Absolutely.
So clients really need to understand those, and it's mainly for protection for them.
Very, very good point. So for myself and for others that are listening, I always say whether you're drinking a cup of tea or putting on your jogging shoes right now listening to this podcast, can you please explain the types of modalities that are out there, the types of therapies? I know, way back when, before therapists, there was your reverend or your parishioner at church. Those were the only people we really went to and talked about our deep problems. And they weren't trained, but they chose that path in life. And still the reverend does take that space. And I think that's a very important piece. But what other types of well-researched therapies are there out there, and when are they a good option?
There's several. I tend to take more of an attachment type of view, that most of what we're made of is how we attached at a young age to our parents. And there's like avoidant attachment, there's insecure attachment, there's secure attachment. And based on that attachment is how we communicate to others. And so one of the therapies that I do for couples is called PACT, which is a psychological approach to couples therapy. And what PACT does is helps to identify, through taking videos of the people, looking at doing several different exercises to recognize their attachment style, to help the couple to understand how they attached. So for instance, I trained under Stan Tatkin, who developed this technique. And he works in the here and now with people. So, for instance, he has a book called, sorry,
That's okay.
blanked on the name.
We all do that,
I
sweetie.
know.
We all do that. You know it'll come back to you. It'll come back to you tomorrow in the shower. Don't worry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in his book, he discusses how, like, for instance, let's say you're someone, let's say you're a wave, like the wave in a cave. That's how he explains it. So the wave is somebody that needs to talk through everything. And they get anxious if they don't get to talk through things. Well, if you're married to someone that's a cave, which is somebody that likes to soothe themselves by going and being by themselves, then there's constantly this abandonment feeling between both parties. The one feels overwhelmed by the other one because they are wanting to talk when the cave isn't ready to talk. So what happens is that anxiety makes them more overloaded, which shuts them down even more. And then the person that's the wave gets more anxious because they don't get what they need to get that answer. So you teach the couple, okay, this is the way you're wired. This isn't going to change. So let's work with how you're wired. So if you're the wave and the cave needs time, cave needs to say, hey, I need a little time to go and process this. I'll come back at such and such a time. That way the person that needs to work through it understands when that person's going to come back. And they don't spin into oblivion and anxiety on the fact that that person went away, which triggers some of their initial trauma in their childhood.
Wow. Now, I know there are some of you out there that
I remembered the book, Wired for Love. Sorry, guys.
See, it was there. We knew it was there.
I recommend every couple read that book.
Wired for Love. Wow, I know that I want to run and get it because I don't know if my husband's a cave, but I know for sure I'm a wave.
But can I say one other thing? So what happens with this neurologically, with the way we're wired and attached, is we activate each other not even on a cognitive level. It may be your voice. It could be the way you look at the person. It's on such a subconscious level. And then all of a sudden there's an explosion. And when we trigger each other into hyperarousal, you either go into fight, flight, or freeze. When the couple is in that state, there's no safety in the relationship. That's when people, they can't talk, they start screaming, they go away. So it's learning before that happens by even learn to be such a study of your partner that even by the way they're looking, you can kind of tell what's going on with them and connecting with them and going and grabbing their arms and looking in their eyes and say, okay, I can see this isn't a good time. So when you understand each other on that level and you learn how to soothe each other instead of continuing to trigger each other, then you can start working through healing.
Wow, that is really beautiful. Again, the name of the book, so in case
Wired for Love by Stan Tatkin.
Wow. So
and the therapy is Psychological Approach to Couples Therapy.
Wow.
PACT.
Wow. I think that is a beautiful example of going and seeing someone who knows their stuff. And I think that's really what I'm getting at is when it's time to heal. And I always talk about forgiveness being the link between love and healing, but we pick up unforgiveness and it feels like it's in a blink of an eye. Like we have this stuff, these ugly emotions, the negative emotions, the anger and the fear and all those things. And we want to put those down, but we just don't know how. And sometimes we go to the doctor if we break our leg, but we don't necessarily search out professionals when we want to put down those ugly feelings and heal those, because sometimes we just don't know how to do it on our own. Maybe because we weren't trained, we didn't have good examples when we were younger. We need to go get those fixed. We need to learn how to do that, especially if we've been triggered. And we need to learn to do that together in a couple's relationship. And we need to see people like Kathy. We need to learn that. I mean, I just learned about my own wave. I just happen to know I'm a wave. And that was just beautiful, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that. And in your practice, again, can you give us more examples of where you see people who've really done the work and used deep forgiveness and where it has really done some beautiful things?
Well, I think with the modalities that I use, another modality I use is eye movement, and I think this is a very powerful modality for individuals. It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Eye movement desensitization
Reprocessing.
Reprocessing.
And what that looks at is the adaptive information processing is the big theory behind it. So let me explain a little about the brain, and this will make more sense.
Okay.
In our brain, and we have, normally with the brain, you have experiences during the day, and then when you go to sleep, the first half of your sleep is for healing the body, the second half is REM sleep. During REM sleep, the brain is like a huge computer, and all the things of the day are then processed and categorized. So this is similar to this activity, and this is similar to that. And then the brain categorizes that stuff and then tries to make sense of what happened during the day. What happens with trauma is, or any kind of really extreme adverse type of experience, is the first place that reads it is the amygdala. And the amygdala of the brain, what it does is it says, okay, this was bad, this was good. Well, if an experience happens that is totally unfamiliar, which happens in trauma with molest and a lot of different things, the brain gets overloaded. So that because the amygdala cannot rate that, doesn't know what that is, and then it also can't get processed in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus takes that experience and puts it in with others to make sense. And if this one doesn't make any sense, then what happens is it floats. So when it floats, it gets triggered by something in the here and now. So for instance, let's say you had a fire at your house and your house burned down. You didn't get sleep, you didn't process it, you never really worked through it. And you go to the beach and there's a bonfire on the beach and you automatically go into a panic attack. Well, people look at you and say that makes no sense. But what's happened is that memory that never got processed, that's floating around, has now entered a network where there's similarity, the smoke. So the smell of the smoke causes all the body reactions, the negative cognition of that original experience happens in the here and now looking at that. So the person thinks, wow, there's something really wrong with me, and then they're anxious for several other things that they're being triggered with.
So is that the PTSD piece?
Yes, that's a PTSD piece.
Right.
But it also works with anxiety, depression, and a lot of other things. So with EMDR, what it does is it works on that theory, and the theory is that most pathologies are caused by unprocessed memories. And once you process the memory, the pathology shifts. So in this particular instance, person would come in for therapy. It's an 8-step process. The therapist would help to determine what is it you want to work on. Anxiety. When's the earliest time you felt this? And then you start working on the memories, the traumatic memories. You break those down as far as what was the cognition around it, what was the body sensation around it, what were the feelings, and then you go into what we call bilateral desensitization, which is a back and forth movement of the hand or an object, and it activates the left and right brain. So it kind of mimics, in a way, REM sleep. And then what it takes is that memory and processes it and puts it into adaptive memory. And in the process, you're looking at the negative cognition, you're installing the positive cognition. Then it actually shifts that memory, where the memory then becomes just a memory with no feelings, a neutral feeling around it. And then that shifts all the other actions in their life. So then they can go to a fire, they aren't activated. Any other type of emergency situation, they don't feel that same charge that they felt originally.
Wow, that's very, very
It's
interesting.
more complicated than
yeah.
that. But
Well, no, that sounded pretty complicated right there.
Yeah.
So that was really, really interesting. So how do people find this type of therapy?
Well, with EMDR, you have to be a trained therapist.
Uh-huh.
Most therapists that are doing it, it's about 50 hours of training.
Okay.
I'm personally in the process of being certified in it. And I got trained in it many years ago. And since I was trained, it's changed significantly because now it's become an actually foundational theory as opposed to a technique. It's been around. It was developed by...
So it's been around.
It's developed by Dr. Shapiro in 1989.
Wow.
But since then, there's been all kinds of scientific studies, neurological studies looking at the brain and how information is processed, and several different things. And EMDR is now really the main modality for PTSD.
Oh, wow.
And the beauty of it is it doesn't take a lot of sessions. I mean, for a critical incident like with first responders or somebody else that's had has been through a 911 type of experience, it can take between 6 and 8 visits to actually process that event.
Okay.
When you go through the 8-step stage
Wow.
process, and I won't go into detail about
That would be
but
so amazing for our veterans.
it is very amazing for them.
Wow, that would be.
And one of my passions is the first responders and the veterans.
So if you combined different therapies with the talk therapy, with talking about what they've gone through with this type of eye movement therapy, all of this, and of course, my personal passion with talking about forgiveness and understanding the whole purpose of everything and learning from it. Tell me about an experience where you've seen all this come together.
Well, I think what happens is when you do a lot of talk therapy, and I think when people process with EMDR through the memory, they get to a point where they have an understanding of the event that they can then forgive the original person that caused the event. They get a different perspective, and they aren't locked in the looking at it based on, with the feelings of their bitterness, unforgiveness, feeling locked by all those feelings. Once they process it and they make sense of it, for instance, like a child, if they get molested, their brain doesn't know how to process that. So they take on the cognition of I'm bad or it's my fault.
Oh, heartbreaking.
So they go through their life feeling that way because that's all a child can process. They can't look at that and say there's something wrong with this adult because you've got an adult that's towering over you that you trust, right? And so what happens is later on, as they process through this, they can actually go back and see that it wasn't their fault, to forgive themselves, for one, and also can look at the perpetrator and who really was at fault. And so then their life doesn't have to take on that meaning that everything is their fault or that they're bad or not good enough. So it shifts many different things in life so that you can have a better understanding to let go and be able to forgive, maybe even a little quicker. And so one of the big things I see is people get a forgiveness. Because in their processing, sometimes if a parent was abusive to them, maybe not sexual abuse, but something else, they have more of an understanding of that parent. Wow, that, something comes up about their parents. And it's like once they understand that they did the best they could for what they had to deal with, even though it didn't make any sense, but it was something they experienced, then they have more of a forgiveness and understanding of what happened.
Wow, I think that could not be more powerful and life-changing. And when I talk about forgiveness, I talk about changing perspective. That when forgiveness sneaks in, and especially in relationship forgiveness, when it comes to a parent, even a spouse or an ex-spouse or a boss, a cousin, a sibling, when perspective comes in and you can see the relationship and it sneaks in that perspective that another person is on their road and they are, I don't want to use the word damaged, but the word is, help me with the correct word, that they have their own stuff and it came through and you got part of their bad behavior and it hurt you, but their stuff came from their place and their inability to behave well. And it was so sad. Sometimes it's just sad. It's just terribly sad. And there's no really good words for it that you can put in. Some empathy sneaks in for the terrible thing that happened, whether it be even an argument or the alcoholic parent or the alcoholic spouse. There's a lot of drug abuse out there, and you see how terrible their lives are, and you feel so abused by that person, but then you see their sad, terrible life, and some empathy sneaks in a little bit. And you're right. I think through that empathy, forgiveness is what all of a sudden comes through that. Like, it doesn't mean what they did was okay by any shape or form. No. I think that's where forgiveness gets confused a lot in, I think, our society.
Well, I think with forgiveness, you're letting go of the feelings around it, but it does not change the act.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It does not change or make you forget what happened.
Right.
But the more that, spiritually, I think bitterness, unforgiveness, resentment, murder, whether it's gossip or whether it's gossip or actually murdering someone. These are all more levels of what happens when you don't forgive.
Right.
And it causes, we know through studies that it actually destroys the body. It changes the hormones. It causes higher cortisol levels, diseases, cancers, all kinds of things. So forgiveness from a spiritual sense makes total sense, but even if you aren't a spiritual person, it makes sense.
Yes.
Because it helps you to be able to have a peaceful life.
Right. You know, there's a wonderful study that I've been working with in regards to hospice and end-of-life care. And it looks at 399 palliative care nurses, and those are nurses who are working with people at the end of life. And the number one thing that they deal with is people who are dealing with forgiveness issues at the end of life. And that's talking about regret, self-forgiveness, and forgiveness of others. And when that forgiveness issue is dealt with, how much better their quality of life is at the end of life, and how easy it is to solve. And wouldn't it be great if we could work on that so much earlier, right, in our life than waiting until the very end? And that's really what I want to get across today, is that we can seek people out like Kathy. We can go to a counselor. We can see our religious, spiritual counseling. We can reach deep inside, and we can get help for those things. There are some amazing modalities I had never even heard of, and they can really, really help. And we can talk about it from a religious standpoint. We can talk about it from a cognitive standpoint. We can do a whole bunch of different therapies. And we have another therapy that Kathy would like to talk about.
You know, when you talk about forgiveness, sometimes it's necessary in therapy to unpack what's gone on, and then the client can start to understand where they need to forgive.
Good point. Unpack. I like that.
And I like to say is one of the things that is my passion is helping people get to the root of what's keeping them stuck in life and helping them dismantle that. So I am involved as a co-therapist in a modality with Dr. Amy Pearson called Pace Avoidance System Psychomotor. And what this therapy does in a group sense is everyone discusses what's their pattern, and then what's their pattern in life. What is the thing that keeps getting in their way of what they're dealing with? And then we use objects and actually people and put them out on the floor. And we can actually then unpack. The person is not put out there, but the feelings are put out there. Who caused the feelings are put out there. So, if somebody's been, for instance, molested, we'll put the mother and father out in shells. And then we start to work with the client on, if your mom and dad would have had good parents, what would that have been like for you? And once they can start imagining the possibility of something, if understanding that their parents treated them a certain way, and if they would have been treated different, it would have changed them, then an epiphany happens for the person.
Perfect.
And that then leads to an understanding of the person that hurt them, of forgiveness. Not that it changes, and then,
no,
but we can actually then go into the original trauma and have somebody in the group play the ideal mom, the ideal dad, and actually let that person hear what they wanted to hear based on what they wanted to hear. Like way back there then, what would you have liked to have heard from your mom? Oh, I would have liked to have said that she was there for me. I would have liked to have been reflected. So then we actually act that out. And what happens, it's a very involved therapy as well, and it's a very neural therapy too. As the new experience comes in, it sits alongside the old experience and actually kind of changes it. The brain actually changes. Like with all three therapies that I talked to you about, the brain actually changes in these therapies. As the brain learns a different way of connecting things, and there's a shift in the person.
Isn't our brain just fantastic?
It's amazing.
Fantastic.
It could take years of study. The brain is amazing.
Well, that kind of backs up to what I was talking about. It allows us to see the situation in a different way. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't we don't forget that the bad thing happened, but it does let us get a different perspective. And I love that we're able to, in this therapy that you're speaking about, for example, if you just want to use the parents, wouldn't we love to say our parents were perfect and they said exactly the right thing all the time? And maybe you're the lucky one out there and have those perfect parents, but most of us don't. And last time I checked, I'm not the perfect parent, and I'm sure my children will have some things to say. But wouldn't it be great if we could just replace that feeling, or put it alongside? I love the way that you said that. Put it alongside the incident and have it next to, and have something else to access, and be able to access a different feeling and replace it with, this is what I wanted to be said to me.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I would have liked that to be handled. This bad thing happened, and if it would have been handled this way, I wouldn't have had so much trauma about it. That is so beautiful. And, that just, it's amazing how our brains can do that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about all these three main modalities that I use is that it looks at the body, mind, emotions, and spirituality.
And the spirit piece.
It looks at all the pieces together, because we know through science that we carry DNA from past generations that are in our body. There's experiences in our body. Our body holds a lot of information.
Right.
And in any of these therapies, more than the mind needs to be accessed for all of the experience. So all these things are held in the body, they're held in the mind, they're held in the emotions, and these are what forms our perceptions on things.
Wow.
So as you start to unpack these things, whether it's pace avoidant in a group where you can actually see it played out on the floor, that's why I used to always love to do sand tray, because you would take what's in your mind and put it on objects on the floor. It just helps to kind of make sense of what's going on. Or whether it's EMDR, where you're processing through and your brain activating the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere are coming together.
Is that the eye one?
Process the information.
Okay.
Or with PACT, where you're actually seeing how you're wired and you're learning to soothe each other in whatever your deficit is.
And that's the couple one.
Yeah, and
okay.
accepting your partners for who they are, as opposed to trying to change them.
Right. Wow, you shared with us 3 amazing modalities that I had never really understood or even heard about before. And I hope you listening, that just opened up your mind. It's more than just sitting in a room and talking to someone. It's really getting to the heart, mind, and soul of what's happened to us, so that we can bring in forgiveness and bring back joy to our life and move on and not hurt others through our actions either. Take responsibility for what we've done and just really let love happen, and really let forgiveness be the link between love and healing. Kathy, I just really, from deep down in my soul and heart, want to thank you for sharing such a fantastic passion you have. And thank goodness. And I want to say thank you for being a therapist, and thank you for helping so many people. And, how can people find a therapist? Who should they call? Should they look it up in the phone book? Should they call their insurance companies? Should they ask their friends? I know you're here in San Diego, but, for people listening all over the country, how should they do that?
With the different therapies, you can look up practitioners that practice those therapies. I find that a really good resource is Psychology Today.
Psychology
Today has a lot of therapists on it, and there's a lot of bios on the therapists.
So is that like psychologytoday.com?
Yeah,
that type of thing?
psychologytoday.com and on the internet. I mean, the internet is a great way to research and find out about people.
Okay.
And if they have a website, you can kind of see what kind of therapies they are into, and you can read about the different ones. And then I would suggest, if you know somebody that can refer you, like a doctor or a friend that may have used a therapist, that's a way to find somebody. I think
that's always a good idea. Yeah.
It's always great, word of mouth.
Okay.
But I would really suggest that even if you find people online and you find 2 or 3 therapists, call them up and interview them. And before you go in, it's always a good idea to make sure you're going to feel comfortable with this person. And usually on the phone, you can kind of tell whether there's a connection. I mean, I know I can. I can tell whether it's someone I can help or someone I can't. And if I don't have the expertise for that person, then I can refer them to somebody else.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. And I want to also ask that at some other time, I definitely want to bring you back. I want to talk again more about therapy, more about where forgiveness fits, and also really want to talk about grief therapy at some point, because I think a lot of times we get in grief about loss, whether that be after a death, after a relationship is over, and forgiveness kind of sneaks in there too, especially we have a hard time forgiving after a loss many times. So definitely want to bring you back at another time. And I look forward to talking to you all again on the Forgiveness Solution podcast. This is Reverend Misty time.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's just been
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Really a joy. And please send me your forgiveness questions at revmisty.com. And you can send me an email at revmisty@outlook.com. Please subscribe to the podcast at Sacred Stories and like us. And thank you so much.
I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss more than this. I wish you